But we've got an excellent panel lined up coming up right now, and we're especially happy to have with us St. Louis Alderman Cohn. Shane is the gentleman who has filed and who has worked to pass, and we are, and I'm sure he'll tell us more about this, but if I understand correctly, we are on the brink of passing an ordinance in St. Louis, which could be described as decriminalization. That might not be a politically apt description, but nonetheless an ordinance which, much like the one passed in Columbia in 2004, would eliminate the possibility of jail for minor marijuana possession offenses. A very important measure. Kelly Maddie, who was listed on the agenda, unfortunately could not be with us here today due to unforeseen circumstances that arose last night. But we do have on the panel another individual who was not originally listed, and that's my friend Amber Langston, presently of Kansas City, formerly of West Plains, and formerly of Columbia, Missouri, where she was instrumental in leading the successful campaign to pass what we call Proposition 1 and 2, both a decriminalization measure and a medical marijuana legalization measure in terms of possessing small amounts in Columbia back in 2004. And I was also involved in that effort. Maranda Jo Reynolds is with us from Springfield, and Miranda's been long active with NORML in Springfield and has also been a member of the board of directors of show-mecannabis regulation now, and is a key player in Springfield, where likewise we are working to pass an ordinance similar to the one that Columbia passed in 2004, and we'll tell you more about that as the panel proceeds. Now, John, are you going to be joining this panel here, or
I'm just moderating?
You're just being the moderate. All right. John is our token moderate on this panel, so please welcome John.
I don't know if I would ever call myself that, but okay. Okay, so I think I'd like to take this sort of chronologically as to which reforms were introduced first and which are still pending, and some of which are maybe still yet to be introduced. So I would turn it back over to Dan to talk about, and probably a little bit from Amber as well, about the 2004 and well, I guess the previous campaigns as well, about how you guys passed decriminalization and medical marijuana in Columbia.
Well, I'm happy to do that. It's one of my favorite topics. I want to suggest that each of our speakers stand when we speak, because we don't have an elevated podium. I think folks toward the back have a hard time seeing. I think you all can hear us well, but at any rate, indeed, our success in 2004 was very significant, and established again a city ordinance against marijuana possession, but which eliminated the possibility of jail. Previously, like many cities throughout the state, one could serve up to a year in jail for marijuana possession, the same penalties as under state law for misdemeanor possession. In Missouri, misdemeanor possession is defined as possession of up to 1.25 ounces. I'm not sure who, I was just talking to someone the other night about it. I'd like to research and find out who it was that decided sometime back in the 1960s to 35 grams instead of 28 grams. But fortunately, that law was reformed, and that important change was made as well. And in well, gosh, starting way back in the mid-1980s, actually, we placed on the Columbia ballot, and if I remember correctly, there have actually been 4 elections on marijuana policy in Columbia over the past 30 years or so. And the first 3 were unsuccessful, but they laid the groundwork for our success. And no one should be afraid of failing in an effort to change these laws, and you will always, I think, always gain from the experience and build on what you've done before. And that's what we did. There were 2, efforts that failed, one in the mid-80s, one in the 90s. 2003, we tried again. Amber was with us by then, and a group of people got together, like I guess Margaret Mead said, it's always a small group of committed individuals that make things happen. And so we got a core group together, and we got the energy together to go out and gather the petition signatures that we needed to put the issue in front of the city council. Now, just as in Springfield and many city charters, there is a provision that citizens can place an issue before the city governing body, the city council in Springfield and Columbia, and if that body does not pass the measure as it's proposed, their only alternative is to put it on the ballot. That happened in Columbia. Usually politicians are happy to pass the buck, not deal with a difficult question, and say, well, we're not going to pass it, but we'll put it before the voters. And that happened. Now in 2003, just as had happened on 2 previous occasions, we only got slightly above 40% of the voters to support a decriminalization measure. And, you know, looking back on it, it seems like we were incredibly naive not to realize how important it is to be on a presidential election ballot. And now that seems so obvious. Now that seems so fundamental. But we had this thing on the ballot in April because that's when the city council elections happen, so that seemed like a logical thing to tie it to. And we had one on, I think, in the summer even, you know, and it was just, obviously a lot of the students in Columbia weren't there at that time. But that was when we had the energy, and that was when people got it together and put it on the ballot. It didn't pass. Every time we got a little over 40%, including 2003, April of 2003. Got a lot of attention for the issue. There was a lot of discussion and debate, so, you know, that's always nice up to a point, but winning is better. And so we finally figured out, and somebody pointed out, that, you know, I bet you'll do better on a presidential election ballot. So in November of 2004, we turned those numbers around. Instead of losing by 40 to 60%, we won by 60 to 40%. We won more than 60% of the voters' support in that election for 2 reform measures. One, which again eliminated jail, limited the fines down from $1,000 to $250, and created what the ordinance calls a strong presumption that the proper disposition of a marijuana possession or a paraphernalia possession case is to suspend imposition of the sentence on that charge. Now, in Missouri, there are 2 kinds of probation. They are called suspended execution of the sentence or suspended imposition of the sentence. Suspended execution means the judge gave you a specific sentence in terms of jail or a fine or some combination, but it's set. There's a number. There's a number of days, months, years, or dollars, and the sentence is set in stone. That means you have a conviction, under Missouri law at least. When you get a sentence, that's when you get to be a convicted person. And that conviction will be public forever. Under current Missouri law, there is no way to remove it from your record. There is nothing that can be done to remove that from what is now the very public record on the internet. Case.net has raised the stakes in this game tremendously, not just with marijuana cases, of course, but with any kind of a criminal record. Now that CaseNet is there, every landlord, every lender, and every employer that you encounter for the rest of your days is going to look up your record when you ask them for a job or a loan or a place to live. And it's significant. You know, it's very rare that having a conviction is helpful in those situations. and most generally, it will be seen as a negative factor. So getting a suspended imposition of sentence avoids that. And that's what our ordinance not requires, but very much encourages the courts to grant. It's a suspended imposition of sentence, which means the judge has not sentenced you. And therefore, you are legally, truthfully, literally not convicted of the charge, even though you may have entered a plea of guilty to it. And the bonus is that as soon as you successfully complete an SIS probation, you not only can you never be convicted, but there will be no public record of the entire matter. No public record on the internet, no public record in the records of the court, no public record available to the general public to indicate that this ever happened. And so a suspended imposition of sentence is a far, far better outcome. And in a nutshell, that's what we passed as far as our decrim ordinance. We also separately proposed a medical marijuana ordinance, which in effect legalizes the possession and use of up to 35 grams. It doesn't legalize cultivation, it doesn't legalize retail sales, although it's intriguing to come back and try something like that. But the ordinance has been enforced consistently. We went back and made some very slight face-saving compromises with the police union because they launched an effort to repeal our ordinance. Frankly, if they'd gotten it on the ballot again any time other than a presidential ballot, I think we probably would have lost and it would have been repealed. So we went to them at a point where they realized it was difficult to get these signatures. They thought they could just set up a tent and people would flock to them to sign their petition, but it turned out it ain't that way, and it took hard work. And so we went to them at that point and said, hey, maybe we can work out a compromise here. Maybe we can, you know, adjust a couple things, and you guys won't repeal it, and you know, we'll just all go away happy. And that's what happened. And so instead of the lowest law enforcement priority. It's now among the lower law enforcement priorities, which language I never thought really made much impact anyway. What really counts is the language that requires the police to send these cases only to the city court. And frankly, that provision, I think, is what makes Columbia's ordinance perhaps the best in the nation. And there are a lot of towns like Ann Arbor and Madison that have low fine local ordinances. But when you go up there to the Hash Bash or the Harvest Fall Festival in Madison, the cops will very publicly say, if you smoke pot and we catch you, we're not sending you to city court, we're sending you to state court. So we figured out that you could actually simply write into the ordinance, thou shalt not send these cases to state court. There are police department, we pay their salaries, we tell them what to do. By God, we can set policy for our own police department, and the police, to their credit, follow that pretty darn consistently. Who does not follow it are, at least most of the time, is the Boone County Sheriff's Department and the Missouri State Highway Patrol. And they never send anything to city court. It's not as if they're only singling out this offense, but by God, our ordinance says when any law enforcement officer suspects an individual of possession. So we wrote it that way because we are well aware that highway patrolmen and Boone County Sheriff's deputies do make arrests within the city limits. Not often, 80% of them are done by city police, but we are working currently on trying to persuade the Boone County Sheriff in particular to cut that out and send these cases to city court. I mean, he and his officers violate the law. They somehow think they're above these ordinances of our city, or they're too good to testify in a city court. At least that's my perception. And so we are in the process of attempting to persuade the police to follow the law. Thank you.
Amber, you were a big part of that, those camps, the 2003 and 2004 campaigns. Would you like to have anything to add about that?
Sure. I'll add a couple of points. So I don't have a name tag here. I'm Amber Langston. I'm one of the board members for Show-mecannabis. I'm the secretary, actually, of the title. And I was living in Columbia back in 2003, 2004. I worked with Dan on those campaigns, and I guess probably a couple of points that I would want to make about that. You know, the first time that we did the campaign in 2003, it took a lot of energy and a lot of effort. Obviously, all of these things do. You don't always win, but you have to keep trying. And, you know, I guess the one question that came up a lot, you know, is what did you do differently? I think having it on a presidential, during a presidential election was important, but it wasn't everything. We had opposition the first time around. The second time around, I don't know, maybe they thought we weren't going to be able to do it because we had just failed, but we really didn't have organized opposition. But part of that is because I think we addressed some of the concerns that the community had with what we were doing. And so, you know, one of the important things to remember, and I'm sure that Miranda is going to talk about this as well, is getting people involved in the conversation before you implement your policies. And so, you know, there was a concern that there was just basically no punishment. What if it was just a fine? So what if, you know, your kid's getting in trouble, you're not addressing an issue here? And so we added community service, that one little thing. The judge can give you community service, and that right there is bringing a potential problem child back into the community, back into a situation where, you know, they're getting sort of those social needs perhaps addressed that weren't addressed previously. So, you know, that I think was an important thing. Another point about that particular campaign is that, you know, when we started out, we failed in 2003, and we were a little discouraged, and we were really tired. And I was in school at the time, and some of the other hardworking activists were also in school, and so we were very tired. But we came back in the fall, and we had our student group, and we had all of these people that were just at the student normal and student for sensible drug policy group, and you know, they wanted to do another campaign. That's why they were there. They were there because something was happening, and the fact that we had just tried to get something going, you know, brought people to the table who wanted to be involved. And, you know, they pushed us. They said, we want to do it again. We want to do it again. And we were like, we don't want to do this again. That was really hard. And they're like, no, we got to do it. We got to do it. And there's so much energy and so much enthusiasm. We thought, well, okay, you know, maybe we've got all these people this time. You know, it's going to help. We'll have more involvement, and so we started, and you know, there was a great deal of enthusiasm those first few weeks before all of the papers started being due in class and all of the tests started happening, and it sort of dwindled down to, you know, just a handful of people that ended up really doing a lot of the work. And so I want to, I guess, make a point that you need to get everybody involved, but at the same time, you know, the people in this room, I hope no one is disappointed in the numbers, because I think it's great, and the people in this room could legalize marijuana in Missouri. And so, you know, just don't doubt that we are small, because there's a lot of support out there. Let's see, what else did I want to make a point? I don't know, I didn't exactly come prepared. I didn't know I was going to be on this panel today. I've been involved in some other campaigns as well, so that's probably relevant. I spent a couple of years living...
We can get to it.
Oh.
Just talk about the Columbia one right now. We'll get to the other stuff.
Okay. I'll just go ahead and leave it at that.
We'll have questions at the end of the panel.
Okay. I'll just pass this on to John or Miranda.
Yeah, yeah, I think Amber's very right that perseverance definitely pays off, and if you keep at something, it also attracts other people into it. And then Maranda will also be able to tell you something about perseverance. I'm sure most of you are familiar with what happened in Springfield last summer and fall, but they tried to pass something similar to Columbia, and then something very unexpected happened. And Maranda will tell you all about that.
Hi, I'm Maranda Reynolds. I am an SMCR board member, and I'm also the president of Springfield Cannabis Regulation, which was the organization we built to pass a decriminalization ordinance similar to what they had in Columbia, and that happened just last year. I'll also start by echoing Amber's sentiments that really getting momentum and working with the momentum that you have is extremely important in these campaigns. Part of the reason we decided to do something in Springfield is because we had already gained a very large supportive base of supporters and volunteers in Springfield. Well, I'll just say an unexpectedly large amount. But we had that momentum going from the legalization campaign that Show Me Cannabis did in 2012. As you all know, that didn't end up making it to the ballot. But the wonderful thing is that got momentum started for people in our area. Springfield NORML had the group, it had kind of dissipated over the years, and that petition drive really got us up and going again. And we still, to this day, have, it's small, but a consistent group of people that come every week, and we still have new faces every week, which is pretty amazing. But with that momentum that we had, we decided, I think the petition drive for legalization ended in about May, and we realized in Springfield that we still had a couple of months to get something on the ballot. And as Dan said, it's very important to get these things on the ballot in a presidential election year, which is what we were working with. And the number of signatures required was pretty low. It was about 2,100 signatures. So we knew this would be doable with the people that we had that were passionate about what they were doing. We very quickly, probably in about a month and a half, and with the help, some monetary support from National Cannabis Coalition and from Show Me Cannabis, and other donors in Springfield as well, we were able to collect these signatures in about a month and a half. And as Dan mentioned, the process goes like this. You collect the signatures. Once it's verified, the council has the option to pass it themselves or to put it on the ballot. Now, our council in Springfield decided there was a third option, which was they ended up passing the ordinance, but most of them, all of them but one, specifically said that they passed the ordinance so they could change it. And two of them explicitly stated that they passed it so they could totally repeal it. And unfortunately, that's what they ended up doing. We kind of had a bad scenario going in with the council. They were just coming off the heels of another very heated debate in Springfield about a sexual orientation and gender identity ordinance. And so our ordinance, when it was read, was after the council sat through 3 hours of a very religious group from the Bible Belt hashing back and forth their opinions on this. So we really didn't get this, we didn't really get a good breeding ground with them. So I think that that's kind of what caused the problem between the council and us, is they were already upset, like physically and emotionally upset from what went on that night. and then to have something else that they really didn't take us seriously, which I think it was definitely not a good idea on their part. They also kind of got in trouble because the city attorney, who was very busy at that point, didn't end up giving us feedback in a timely manner on our ordinance. So we put some things, some extra things into our ordinance above what Columbia had, which was expungement. It would allow people with no similar convictions in 2 years to expunge that record, which, as Dan said, is really important because all those records are public. Anybody can have access to them. And then another one was to add an oversight committee, which would have been good. We were concerned that in our area that they maybe it would get passed, but it wouldn't be respected. So that was the idea there, was kind of keep the ordinance accountable. But later on, the city attorney basically told the council his opinion, but wouldn't really tell us his full opinion. So there was kind of this dissonance between what the council was hearing and what we were hearing. And I think that really set us up for some difficulties, which I know all this sounds like a big bummer. So I want to bring this around. The most positive thing about this, and again it goes back to the momentum, is that coming off of the momentum of legalization, we had the media begging us for interviews. I had an interview with the media at least once a week for a good month, if not more. And even after the council did what they did, I still had reporters contacting me about once a month for about 6 months after that happened. And not only that, at the end, when the council did end up passing the ordinance just to repeal it the next time they could, we even had the local newspaper writing an opinion article, an editorial, saying that what the council did was wrong. And actually, I believe that they wrote it before the council did it, saying that if they were to do that, like some of the council people threatened, that it would be wrong, that it would be injustice to the democratic process in our city. And I think that's one of the biggest things that it exposed, is that you have to work with your, you have to, and this goes back to what Amber was saying, sorry I got lost there for a second, but you really need to get the conversation started. The council people in Springfield definitely did not take this seriously. I think if we might have been able to kind of set ourselves up ahead of time, had people writing letters before the campaign, had people trying to talk to the council, it might have gone a little smoother. And I think that's my biggest take-home message here, is that as much as the media is talking about this issue right now, we need to keep pressing it. We need to actually directly contact our representatives. We need to write them emails. We need to make phone calls if we can. Because although, there are so many surveys coming out, Pew, Rasmussen, Gallup, saying that a majority of people in America support legalization, not even just decriminalization, I think some council, or some representatives, some council members in cities, some aldermen, are still allowing themselves to ignore this evidence. So I think the only way we can really break through, especially in Missouri, is to do whatever you can to contact them. And then also, on a smaller scale, talk to people you know about it. I know it's difficult. I know it's still a tiniest bit taboo, but I mean, we even have a better opportunity now to start talking about this with our friends, because you can just you can send them a news article, one of the many news articles that are in national news, that are in Missouri news, that are even in your own city's news all the time. And that's a really good way to get the conversation started. So now's a better time than ever to talk to people about it.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Alderman Cohn, I think, did a very good job. He's the only one that worked, he's obviously on the Board of Aldermen, and everyone else worked through the initiative process. He worked through the Board of Aldermen and did a very good job of talking to people beforehand and making sure that he had something that everyone could agree to. And so I'll let him tell you about how that process went.
I'm happy to be here, actually. I really didn't think that this was going to be quite as controversial as it turned out to be. It seems like it's a rather common sense measure. And so, especially when, in fact, many people do, especially in the city of St. Louis, favor legalization of marijuana. And, we're just simply talking about procedural issue or change in the way these cases are handled. So, for me, this has been a bit of a journey only because, it's not a personal cause for me. I've never even smoked a cigarette in my life, but for me, I feel like my own personal development comes from, understanding the plight of my fellow human beings and trying to, help out. And so, this is certainly an unjust issue when it comes to, treatment and equity. And, as Dan and, some of the other panelists have mentioned, these are things that stay with people for the rest of their life. Employment decisions are based off of this, education decisions are based off of this. And to have someone's record blemished, for something like this is just ludicrous in my opinion. So, I started this journey, if you will, a number of years ago. I was actually at a conference of young elected officials that was taking place, and one of the panels that we were talking about was drug reform. And so, I started kind of socializing this issue at that point in time, and happened to have a conversation with someone in the mayor's office. And some of you, I don't know, maybe on Mayor Slay's listserv for emails or whatever, but there was a poll that went out that was ended up covered by the Riverfront Times about an alderman wanting to decriminalize marijuana in the city of St. Louis. And they didn't mention the alderman, and it was kind of a game on the poll to guess which alderman was going to introduce the measure. And it just so happens that 2 weeks earlier I had tweeted something about the conference that I was at, and so I ended up being at the top of the list in terms of who was guest. So I was outed, and so I'm used to that. But anyways, so the conversation started back then, and then recently with the petition initiative at the state level, and Carmen Wilkinson, who was mayor of a small city in St. Louis County, which has been dissolved, a huge fan of reform on all levels, as am I. We started having some conversations about introducing something at the city, and so I started to rely upon just best practices. Columbia, Springfield. I actually did not know that story. That's a very funny story, and I can see how that might be the case, having dealt with that locally here. And St. Louis is the liberal bastion of the state of Missouri, so I couldn't even imagine what some council members in Springfield must be dealing with. But it was really just a matter of relying upon those best practices and putting something together. And initially, when we introduced the bill, or when I introduced the bill, it was framed mostly around medicinal, marijuana, and kind of morphed throughout the legislative process to accommodate, requests from committee chairs, and there was all this politicking and gaming taking place, throughout that process. But at the end of the day, after 3 major revisions to the bill, we were able to get a floor substitute introduced and amended on the floor of the Board of Aldermen with 18 votes. And it takes 15 votes to pass a piece of legislation. So we went down right after that for spring legislative recess, which is a little longer this year because we had municipal elections. But we're coming back next Monday, and we'll be expected to take a vote on the bill, and I expect that it'll pass. And so, it's not quite as liberal as Columbia's ordinance is, but it's at least progress. And so, I continue to look forward to working on this matter and others in the future too. So I just recently got elected, re-elected, so I'll be serving another 4 years and hopefully living up to my grandfather's title of being a wild-ass liberal. So, if there's, I guess, is there any other thing specific that you want me to talk about other than that, or?
No, not necessarily. Maybe I guess I would like to talk a little bit about. You kind of went to different groups and talked to you talked to the police department. You got kind of made sure that everyone was on board.
Right.
With what you were doing.
And that was very helpful. So when putting together the initial draft of this legislation, I worked with the city councilor's office, I worked with the circuit attorney, Jennifer Joyce, and also folks in the mayor's office and some representatives from the police department, just to make sure that when the bill gets introduced, that I'm not going to run into any obstacles or hurdles. And also, inevitably during the public hearing process, I don't want someone coming like the police union and saying that they're opposed to it, because then automatically, even though it really isn't a very controversial issue, and I think on the whole most of my colleagues support it. I mean, 18 of them voted for it, and I'm sure there's a few others that probably would. if it weren't for, it happened right before an election, and so I think some of them were a little bit risk averse. But the elections are behind us, and I think that we'll actually get more than 18 votes, which is exciting. But that's the last thing that you want to have happen is for opposition to show up at these committee hearings, and whether that's the police union or the kind of religious right and seniors that are afraid of this. And I also thought it was interesting, now that I'm talking through this, when I introduced this bill, I overwhelmingly only received positive emails, feedback, phone calls from my constituency and others throughout the region. I think I could probably count on one hand, literally, like the number of negative emails or phone calls that I got, which is really unheard of when you're talking about an issue that is considered controversial like this. And certainly, just a few months earlier, one of my colleagues had introduced a board bill that would require prescriptions for pseudoephedrine because, we have some serious issues with methamphetamine production in the city of St. Louis. And so, I was getting letters every single day and phone calls every single day, and I wasn't even a sponsor or co-sponsor of the bill. And, they were from seniors that lived in my ward and, just neighbors and all that fun stuff. And they were all negative. They were overwhelmingly negative. And, to me, to introduce something like this and everyone consider it a controversial subject and overwhelmingly everyone is in support of it, it just seems common sense. I don't understand why this is such the issue. I do understand, but it's so frustrating having to work through this process. And so, certainly the work that you all do is extremely helpful, and I would encourage you to continue to be involved in organizations like this and others that are supporting this effort, because as an elected official, I can do as much work, behind the scenes, in the smoking rooms of City Hall and all of that, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, I have to still get 15 votes to pass that out, which means that those folks need to hear from their constituency, and you are their constituency. And so making your voice heard is something that I talk about all the time. And I can talk with the police department and the city councilor's office till I'm blue in the face. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to the legislative process, it's really about the people. So making your voice heard is really important. So since we got kind of a late start to this panel, I will allow for some questions. Didn't get around to all the questions I'd like to that I would have liked to ask, but we'll have some of yours. I am going to take moderator's privilege though to say one quick thing. I think that there and Maranda and Alderman Cohn both referred to it that elected officials think this issue is so controversial, but then it tends to be that the people speaking out on it are overwhelmingly in favor, and you don't really get that much opposition. But I think that there's some sort of there's a sort of catch-22 going on, because people are afraid to speak out about this issue because they think that, and I'm dead serious, people think that if they just talk about it, they're going to get their doors kicked in, and that's that's crazy to think that in a free country we are in a situation like that. But it's true, and so people don't speak out about it, and so representatives think that. And I've talked to some state legislators who they say, well, I kind of think legalization is a good idea, but I mean, my constituents are never going to think that, and so I can't. They're not willing to lead on it, I'll tell you that. But they think personally it's not a bad idea, but they say I'm not hearing from my constituents, so I'm not going to talk about it. All right, so all right, there's a question back there.
Okay, so this legalization, is this for St. Louis City only?
Yeah, so technically it's not legalization because it's illegal at the federal and state level. And so the bill that would be passed by the Board of Aldermen and hopefully signed by the mayor, and he has committed to signing it if it passes out, that would only impact St. Louis City. So St. Louis County, St. Charles County, Madison County would not be impacted by this at all.
So if a person is driving through and they're in St. Louis City limits,
right.
Does it affect them?
Yeah, anyone who's driving through the city would
be protected under if it passes.
Mm-hmm. Mind you, all other applicable state laws still apply though too. So if the police consider you driving underneath the influence or whatever, the advice that Dan was providing earlier is very helpful. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, I would also just say that even though it applies narrowly, it can lead to bigger things beyond its it helps build momentum as well for reform at the statewide level. Back there, okay, all right, sure. I'll go over there and then back there.
I don't know what you call this in your professional lobbyism, but did you, like this time, the vault time and approach it, did you ever go into the Lion's Den and actually go into like churches and ask to speak to the Lion's Den? And just, because that's a very effective way. You know, I mean, you're not going to convince all of them, but you'll be surprised when they go in that private voting booth and they're secret, what you can get. And I just wondered, did you try that, or did you just say, oh no, we're not going near those people, they're not for us?
I didn't do that. We had a very short time frame. I mean, the whole campaign was probably 2.5 months.
And most of that was trying to get signatures.
Yeah, from collecting signatures through the council meetings. So there wasn't a lot of time. Also, that's something that definitely, it's a good idea. I don't know if we would have done it, but if you would have told us that and they had put it up for a vote, then we probably would have loved to try to connect with people in that way. I think that would have been a really great...
That's what you do now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. We should definitely do that.
You get 1 email, 2 email addresses, and you can inform them. They inform their social groups. And I live in Chesterfield, you know, in the upper 5% of the people. And I can't tell you people that years ago would know that in private, and these people carry a cross on top of their car, that they're in private, they say, no, we got to do something different. This is ridiculous, okay? Yeah. So you'd be surprised the support you have out there if you reach out to them and you get people thinking, okay?
I think you're exactly right, because what we saw in Springfield is that, and like John mentioned, there was very little negative input in front of the council, like opposing the ordinance. There was only one person who spoke against it while she was there. I do know for a fact that she is religious, but I also don't think that that is like, I don't think it's overwhelming. I still think that most religious people still would support at least some amount of reform. That's undoubtedly true, and you're right. We need to go talk to them.
Their church, you're going to get hit by a lot of people.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of people sitting back there thinking, that's, you know, maybe I've been wrong about this. Maybe I need to rethink my position. And then you get those email addresses, if they'll give them to you, and you have a base now that's spreading.
And one last thing is just that, as I mentioned, there was that sexual orientation ordinance that was up at the in front of the council the same night ours was, and that got a lot of heat. There were a lot of people. The whole council building was packed. There was the overflow was overflowing. People couldn't come in. But for ours, as I mentioned, there was one person at the second meeting who spoke against it. And we just didn't hear much backlash even from the religious community, because I think what's happening really is that they might not be completely supportive, but they just don't care enough to organize against us. And I think that's what you're saying is really important, is that not only can we get them to just not care, we might actually be able to get them to be more vocal in support of us.
Well, another thing is if you get the right ministers that group together, or one that goes against it, that's got power, you've got problems. Okay? So you go behind them and you go out and reach out to their parishioners.
That's definitely true. And actually, I do remember that you guys went and talked before there was a anti-marijuana town hall meeting, and you guys did go to that and talk to people. Let's take I think there was we'll take 2 more questions. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm an assistant lay person in my church. I help the youth pastor, and I've been around marijuana all my life. My mother smokes, and it says in the Bible, you know, God gave us all seed-bearing plants to use for food. You know, and if you want to get technical about it, using food, it turns into cannabis or cannabinoid 11 or whatever it is, something like that, which is more powerful. And everybody knows, and it's almost insulting to the Missouri voter to say that this is bad when God said this is good. You know what I mean? And people that I go to church with, a lot of them partake. You know, I know a lot of people, and I know a lot of them partake that I go to church with. So touching on that fact, it's a lot of people that go to church, especially that are in my age group and my demographic, know that there's nothing wrong with marijuana.
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily divides along religious lines. If we could keep it, just comments on that real brief.
Well, and I will say that with the bill that's pending in the Board of Aldermen right now, I had several members from Metropolitan Congregations United, MCU, who have reached out in support of this as well. So, I do think that that's a good tactic because there are a lot of, faith-based organizations that are interested in this type of reform as well, because it does impact their parishioners.
I will stop at 2, so we actually might have time for 2 more quick questions.
I just wanted to say thanks a lot, Alderman, for your work. It's to be commended, and everybody up there is to be commended. I'm wondering, Dan, is there anything looking over on in Kansas City? Is anyone, and Amber, you're more over there than I am. I live there, but I wonder if there's anything. I believe I have a councilman, Scott Wagner, of Council District 1, that's preliminary indicated to me on a personal level that he would be interested in sitting down and talking about it.
Yeah, there certainly should be. And we've looked into doing an initiative in Kansas City, and the requirements for an initiative in Kansas City are pretty reasonable. It would not be a major problem to raise the number of signatures to put a measure on the ballot in Kansas City. So yes, there certainly are people looking into that, and we hope you'll be part of that, George. It ought to happen. I mean, I'm really proud of the Columbia ordinances, and I love to see us export that revolution to other parts of the state. And until we can pass a statewide law, it certainly is worthwhile pursuing local initiatives. And the other St. Louis County municipalities could also do the same thing. If this could be expanded, certainly.
Amber, did you want to say anything?
Let's get lunch sometime soon.
I regret that I'm going to have to leave shortly, but I didn't want to leave without putting in my 2 cents worth, because I think I probably represent a view probably coming from a different direction than some of the people in the room. My background is in the drug and alcohol recovery prevention and treatment area, and I've served on some boards in that regard, and tried to convince some of the boards that I sat on that this was A, going to happen, and B, that we ought to be on the ground floor of it when it does happen. But I just want the point that Dan just made. I don't mean to denigrate anything that's being done in the local assemblies, the Board of Aldermen, and anything else, but the way to go with this is the way that Colorado went, which is with a very comprehensive scheme of legalization and regulation. And I really, really, really advocate the use of the initiative, the constitutional amendment initiative process, and I bypass the legislature completely, because this is going to result eventually, 20 years hence, big money. And big money means either alcohol or tobacco or both are going to get into the marijuana business, and that's not good for Missouri in my estimation. So I would really like to see it come from the grassroots level by way of initiative petition, and some of the things that I've suggested, I think it will appeal to an enormous population, as this gentleman had indicated.
Certainly, I think you probably won't find much disagreement that I think everyone on this panel is ultimately for legalization and regulation, and I think most of us would agree that it's not going to come through the state legislature. It's going to have to come through the initiative. Would anyone else make a comment on that?
Having worked with the number of members in the state assembly, I agree with you wholeheartedly, is not the place where this is going to happen. They can barely pass a bill in. They've got super majorities in both houses down there. So, I mean, they can't even rally around, tax credit reform and other things that are, supposedly hot button issues for, the folks that are serving down there. So I don't see that that's really something that's going to be the, cause that's picked up by the state assembly. And I think that that's also one of the things that, certainly came out during deliberations with the Board of Aldermen, is whether this should be a local issue or if it should be a state issue. Personally, I favor, legalization, regulation, and taxation of it, just because I think that, we can benefit from that, and it addresses a lot of these issues. You can't do that at the local level. One of the things that we also did as part of this board bill was that part of the fines that would be collected through this would go to drug abuse prevention and substance awareness programs and things of that nature. So we actually through that were able to get the, I guess, complicit, just ignorance, if you will, or they're just going to ignore the issue altogether from the National Coalition of Alcohol and Drug Abuse. They weren't really opposing it, but they didn't want to see it pass, and so they were part of the discussions, and that was one of the outcomes of that as well, which I think is a good addition to the bill.
They actually sort of endorsed decrim in the paper the other day. Dan Duncan did.
Yeah, I mean,
endorsed what?
Decrim, not legalization, but I mean I think it's
progress.
That's a major step forward from him.
And I think that it's progress, and that's part of the important thing about starting these discussions and having these discussions is that through them we'll see progress.
Yeah.
All right, thanks to everyone that was on the panel. Sorry, we got to get started to the next panel because we're already about 15 minutes behind. But if you're on the next panel, come on up and we'll get the table switched out, and Dan will introduce everybody. Thank you, everybody that participated.